Welcome back from the break. We're on the home stretch now, which leads us into Session 8 on Enabling Generics, Changes to Suitability Petitions in GDUFA III. Our first presentation is on Suitability Petitions Enable Generics. Our presenter, Dr. Robert Leyenberger, serves as the Director of the Office of Research and Standards in OGD. Dr. Leyenberger leads OGD's implementation of GDUFA science and research commitments, including internal research activities and external research grants and collaborations to ensure the therapeutic equivalence of generic drug products. ORS also provides pre-submission advice on complex generics through pre-ANDA meetings, product-specific guidances, and correspondence responses. Our second presentation is on Suitability Petitions, a Policy Perspective. Our presentation will be delivered by Session Lead, Ms. Susan Levine, who currently serves as the Deputy Director of the Division of Policy Development in the Office of Generic Drug Policy, where she leads development and implementation of policies for the Generic Drug Program. Prior to this role, she was a Regulatory Counsel in the Office of Generic Drug Policy's Division of Legal and Regulatory Support, where she resolved application-specific regulatory issues. Our third presentation is on the best practices for submitting a suitability petition. Our presenter, Dr. Roseanne Pagaduan, is a supervisory pharmacist in the Division of Filing Review within ORS and OGD. In 2014, Roseanne began her FDA career, as an ANDA filing reviewer in DFR, then subsequently served as a team leader before entering her current role as a supervisor. For our final presentation, we welcome two presenters discussing the Bridging the Difference, bioequivalence assessments for suitability petitions. Our first presenter, Dr. Pamela Garner-Dorsey, is a senior pharmacologist in the Office of Bioequivalence, Division of Bioequivalence III within OGD. She currently serves as a primary and secondary assessor for bioequivalence review. Dr. Dorsey has been with the agency for over 8 years. And our final presenter for Session 8 is Dr. Heather Boyce, who works for ORS within OGD. Heather's been working for FDA over 10 years in good manufacturing processes, pharmaceutical product development, bioequivalence trial design and analysis, and generic drug regulation. Please join me in welcoming our first presenter in Session 8, Dr. Robert Leyenberger.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Leyenberger, the Director of the Office of Research and Standards, and I'm here to kick off our session on suitability petitions. First, I want to tell you why I'm so excited about suitability petitions. And that's because one of the goals that I have for the generic drug program is that we want to maximize J for public health reasons, to increase access to medications, and for the overall efficiency of drug developments. We should maximize the use of the 505J pathway whenever it can be used. This means no unnecessary human studies, the most efficient FDA review process, and it also allows us to focus new drug development resources on new therapeutics and not regulatory games or arbitrage. So this is a worthy goal for public health to use the 505J pathway whenever possible. And so suitability petitions fit into this because they expand the scope of products that can use the 505J pathway. If you go to FDA's regulations, allowed suitability petitions include differences in active ingredient, routes of administration, dosage forms, and different strengths. All changes that generally would not be allowed in an ANDA. But certainly not every change of this type is appropriate for use in an ANDA. And therefore, if you look at our regulations, there are reasons to deny the petitions. A lot of them looking at the different active ingredient changes, or if any of the proposed changes in the generic drug would jeopardize the safe and effective use of the product according to its labeling. So the labeling for the existing products has to be acceptable. Certainly also, if the RLD has been withdrawn for safety and efficacy reasons, that's probably inappropriate to bring that product back in a different dosage form. And again, just for common sense reasons, if FDA has already approved an NDA with the same change, then we won't approve a suitability petition that covers the cases where there's already an available reference listed drug that can be the reference product for generic competition. But if you think about these broadly, what are the reasons FDA will deny suitability petitions or products will be inappropriate for suitability petitions? The bottom line is that if there's new clinical data that's needed for those different active ingredient routes, strengths, then the 505J pathway is not going to be appropriate. The 505B2 pathway is the appropriate case for these type of changes when there's new clinical data needed, new indications for the labeling are appropriate. So this really gets to sharpening and focusing on what's the type of products that can be included in 505J submissions. Even with these constraints, the value of the suitability petition is that they allow the generic industry to fill market needs or opportunity in cases where new clinical data is not needed to fill that need. Some examples include convenience of dosing for patients, right? No tablet splitting, ease of swallowing, efficiency of dosing for healthcare providers, no waste because the containers are strength or right size for the appropriate use. So even within the scope of new strengths, there's lots of flexibility in our pharmaceutical system that could be filled in by suitability petitions, and an efficient process will allow the generics to fill these market needs efficiently in the most efficient way possible. And again, another aspect of suitability petitions is new strengths or presentations that correspond to new ways of using established drugs. Over time, if you've learned that the older approved products can be used in new contexts, and there may be different ways and different populations that weren't anticipated by the original NDA, the suitability petition process allows the generic industry to fill in those gaps again. And so an effective, efficient suitability petition process would be a characteristic of a flexible and adaptable drug development system that can efficiently meet the market needs for different strengths and presentations of well-established products with clear clinical benefits. Now, since suitability petitions are so wonderful, why don't we use them very much? If you look back historically, in the earlier days of the generic drug program, it was more common for products to be approved via the suitability petitions process. But recently, there's not a large number of petitions or products based on those petitions that have been approved. And so let's dig into what the limitations are. I think the primary one that we've heard from FDA is that FDA takes too long to evaluate or approve suitability petitions. If the petitions are not evaluated in a timely manner, the market need evaporates by the time the review is complete. Beyond that step is that one significant change to the suitability petition process in the Hatch-Waxman timeframe is the PREA-Act, the Pediatric Research Equity Act, which set up requirements for pediatric studies for new dosage forms, routes of administration, and active ingredients. And FDA will not approve suitability petitions where the change triggers the need for pediatric studies, and FDA does not waive that requirement. So this is an additional barrier that you need to go over in order to get your suitability petition approved. You need to navigate the PREA Act as well. And finally, suitability petitions, once you get them approved, once you get an application submitted, there's still a race to approval. If FDA approves the B2 application first, then that suitability petition ANDA sort of gets left over and has to reframe against a different reference listed drug and refile the application. Now, what about these limitations? In the GDUFA III commitment letter, FDA and industry agreed to goals on suitability petition reviews. These phase in slowly starting in year 2, but this provides needed resources for suitability petition reviews. So that first issue, suitability petitions are not evaluated in a timely manner, is going to go away once GDUFA III is implemented and the suitability petition goals kick in. You'll see FDA's performance on these goals meeting our usual expectation of all our goals for the other parts of the GDUFA program. We're very successful at meeting them, and we expect that we'll meet all of our goals for the suitability petition process as well. So that's the first step. think the challenge is then that now that there's timely review of suitability petitions, some of the other factors will come more to the forefront. And as I mentioned before, FDA will not approve suitability petitions that need new studies under PREA. And again, the primary impact on this is in the changes to active ingredient, new routes, and new dosage forms, which can trigger requests for pediatric studies. And this is why recent suitability petitions lean much more heavily toward changes in the strengths or presentations that aren't limited by this. And so only full waivers, not even deferrals, can be approved. And this really means the product has no possible use in a pediatric population, or that the existing data covers the new change in the suitability petition. So there are very few post-PREA suitability petitions for new dosage forms. It's not zero, so there are examples. So you have examples of a ER capsule to ER tablet being allowed, a tablet to a powder for oral solution, a tablet to a capsule. So there are cases where it is possible to still achieve a successful suitability petition for a new dosage form, but it requires understanding of the pediatric, the PREA Act, and the application of that to your development program. The final challenge for suitability petitions is what I call the race. Again, so FDA will not approve an ANDA based on a suitability petition if a B2 application for the same change is approved first. This means once a suitability petition is approved, there can be a race, as FDA will currently continues to accept B2 applications for the same change even after a petition is approved. And then this can in fact lead to simultaneous reviews of an ANDA based on a suitability petition and a B2 application for the same change. And I think this really, is a risk factor for generic drug development following suitability petitions. Does this deter the generic industry from optimal use of the submission process? And as we move forward into implementing a new environment for suitability petitions, might want to reconsider what the rules of the race should be, and is there a more optimal balance that achieves the public health benefit we see from suitability petitions in terms of efficient review and evaluation of these type of changes. Finally, to maximize J, we need to make the suitability process work better. The GDUFA III improvements are a significant start, but there are other parts of the system that will affect how broadly we can use the suitability petition process. And improved timelines for the evaluation of suitability petitions will expose other challenges in their use. And I look forward to future discussions around ways that we can optimize the generic drug system to most effectively use suitability petitions. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our exciting session, and we'll be back here for questions at the end.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Levine, and I am the Deputy Director of the Division of Policy Development in the Office of Generic Drug Policy. Today, I will be speaking on suitability petitions, a policy perspective. Our learning objectives today are to describe the types of changes for which a suitability petition may be submitted, learn of potential obstacles to using suitability petitions, and understand the changes that will be coming to processes for reviewing suitability petitions under the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments, or GDUFA III, commitment letter. Let's start with some basic background information. A suitability petition is a request to submit an abbreviated new drug application, or ANDA, that is different from the reference listed drug, or RLD, in route of administration, dosage form, strength, or one different active ingredient in a fixed dose combination drug product. One important thing to note is that a suitability petition must be submitted and approved before an ANDA can be submitted. Now that we know what a suitability petition is, what are the approval standards? A suitability petition will be approved unless investigations must be conducted to show the safety and efficacy of the drug product or proposed change from the reference listed drug, the requested change has been approved in a new drug application, or the requested change triggers the need for pediatric studies under the Pediatric Research Equity Act, also known as PREA, to assess the safety and efficacy, and FDA does not waive the requirement. For a change in active ingredient, a suitability petition will be approved unless the reference listed drug is not a fixed dose combination product, the drug cannot be adequately evaluated for approval without data from studies beyond the scope of an ANDA, the suitability petition does not contain information to show that the active ingredient is of the same pharmacological or therapeutic class and can be expected to have the same therapeutic effect as the reference listed drug. The different active ingredient is not contained in a listed drug, or the remaining active ingredients are not identical to the reference listed drug. And lastly, a suitability petition will be approved unless the proposed change would require significant labeling changes to address a newly introduced safety or effectiveness problem, or FDA has determined that the reference listed drug was withdrawn from sale for safety or efficacy reasons, or the reference listed drug has been voluntarily withdrawn from sale and the agency has not made a safety and effectiveness determination. Next, I'm going to briefly touch on the suitability petition process. You will hear more about this in the next presentation. Once a suitability petition is submitted to FDA, it is reviewed according to the process outlined in MAP 5240.5 titled ANDA Suitability Petitions. I just want to note that this process will evolve as needed to be consistent with the GDUFA III commitment letter. FDA will review and approve the suitability petition unless FDA identifies a reason under 21 CFR 314.93 to not approve. Once the suitability petition is approved, an ANDA with that change can be submitted to the agency. I'd like to spend some time going over the mechanics of how an applicant would reference a suitability petition in an ANDA, since this can get a little tricky. For a first petitioned ANDA, meaning an ANDA has not been approved for the change, the basis of submission is the reference listed drug plus the approved suitability petition. The ANDA must contain a cite to the reference listed drug, which must be the same as the reference listed drug identified in the approved suitability petition, a reference to the suitability petition's FDA-assigned docket number, and a copy of the correspondence approving the suitability petition. On Form FDA 356H, you will identify the reference listed drug, but in your basis of submission statement, which is ECTD section 1.12.11, you will identify the reference listed drug, reference the suitability petition docket number, and include the suitability petition approval letter. Also note that the reference listed drug is generally identified as the reference standard. Next, we are going to discuss how to reference a suitability petition when an ANDA has already been approved for the change requested in the petition. In this scenario, the basis of submission is the reference listed drug and the approved suitability petition. The ANDA must contain a cite to the reference listed drug, which must be the same as the reference listed drug identified in the approved suitability petition, a reference to the suitability petition's FDA-assigned docket number, and a copy of the correspondence approving the suitability petition. Also, the first approved petitioned ANDA is generally selected as the reference standard and should be identified in the appropriate sections of the ANDA as the reference standard. Now, let's talk about therapeutic equivalents for petitioned ANDAs. Therapeutic equivalents are approved drug products that are pharmaceutical equivalents for which bioequivalence has been demonstrated and that can be expected to have the same clinical effect and safety profile when administered to patients under the conditions specified in the labeling. A petitioned ANDA is not therapeutically equivalent to the reference listed drug because of a difference that makes the product not pharmaceutically equivalent. Therefore, the first approved petitioned ANDA does not receive a therapeutic equivalence code. However, a subsequently approved petitioned ANDA would be designated therapeutically equivalent to the first petitioned ANDA. Let's shift gears and talk about a potential obstacle to using suitability petitions. What happens if a new drug application is submitted for the same change? If the new drug application is approved before the ANDA relying on a suitability petition is approved, then the ANDA can no longer reference the suitability petition. Let's look at a case study for venlafaxine where this exact scenario occurred. On October 20th, 1997, a new drug application was approved for venlafaxine extended-release capsules. A few years later, on August 16, 2003, a suitability petition was submitted for a change in dosage form to extended-release tablets. The suitability petition was approved on March 30, 2005. On December 12, 2006, a new drug application was received for the same change in the approved suitability petition, and on May 20, 2008, the new drug application for the extended-release tablets was approved. So, what was the impact of this new drug application approval? First, ANDAs could no longer reference the suitability petition because a new drug application had been approved for the same change. ANDAs now had to reference the new drug application for the extended-release tablets as the reference-listed drug. Further, any pending ANDAs could not amend their application to change their reference-listed drug to the new drug application for the extended-release tablets due to the requirement in 21 CFR 314.96C. This meant that any pending ANDAs citing the suitability petition should withdraw the application. If the applicant still wanted to pursue this drug product, they would need to submit a new ANDA referencing the new drug application for the extended-release tablets and perform any necessary testing against the new reference-listed drug. Switching gears to GDUFA III, let's talk about what changes are ahead regarding suitability petitions. Under the GDUFA III commitment letter, in fiscal year 2023, FDA agreed to work diligently to enhance the agency's processes for reviewing and responding to suitability petitions and review and respond to the pending suitability petitions. Also, under GDUFA III, prior to fiscal year 2024, FDA agreed to take appropriate action to determine if petitioners who submitted suitability petitions prior to fiscal year 2023 remain interested in a response. For fiscal years 2024 through 2027, FDA will conduct a completeness assessment of petitions submitted in these fiscal years 21 days after the date of the petition submission, or if an information request is issued as part of the completeness assessment, FDA agreed to finish the completeness assessment within 21 days after the date of receipt of the information request. Under GDUFA III, suitability petitions submitted in fiscal years 2024 through 2027 will receive a goal date. Suitability petitions submitted prior to fiscal year 2024 will not receive a goal date. If a petitioner wants to receive a goal date on a suitability petition submitted prior to fiscal year 2024, they may withdraw and resubmit a new suitability petition in fiscal years 2024 through 2027. Goal dates. This is a new concept for suitability petitions, and the metrics will be implemented in an increasing fashion. In fiscal year 2024, FDA agreed to review and respond to 50% of submissions within 6 months after the completeness assessment, up to a maximum of 50 suitability petitions completed. In fiscal year 2025, it will be 70% of submissions, up to a maximum of 70 suitability petitions completed. Fiscal year 2026 increases to 80% of submissions, up to a maximum of 80 suitability petitions completed. And finally, fiscal year 2027 is 90%, up to a maximum of 90 suitability petitions completed. And just to note, the date of submission for the purpose of determining the fiscal year of submission will be the date of FDA's completion of the completion assessment. The GDUFA III commitment letter also includes prioritization of certain suitability petitions, specifically if they could mitigate or resolve a drug shortage and prevent future shortages, address a public health emergency declared by the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services under Section 319 of the Public Health Service Act, or anticipated under the same criteria as applied to such a declaration, are for a new strength of a parenteral drug product that could aid in eliminating pharmaceutical waste or mitigate the number of vials needed per dose by addressing differences in patient weight, body size, or age, or are subject to special review programs under the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, also known as the PEPFAR program. Finally, the GDUFA III commitment letter speaks to what happens when there are missed goal dates due to the increased suitability petition submissions. In this circumstance, FDA agreed to prioritize the review of suitability petitions where the goal date was missed prior to reviewing newly submitted suitability petitions for the current fiscal year. However, an exception is made for suitability petitions that are prioritized under the criteria outlined on the previous slide. Now to our challenge questions. Challenge question number 1. Suitability petitions will have goal dates beginning in A, fiscal year 2023, B, fiscal year 2024, C, fiscal year 2025, or D, fiscal year 2026. If you selected B, then you were correct. Suitability petitions will have a goal date beginning in fiscal year 2024. Challenge question number 2. Which of the following statements is not true? A, certain changes may be made via a 505(b)(2) new drug application or a suitability petition. B, an ANDA may not rely on a suitability petition for the change once the same change is approved in a new drug application. C, suitability petitions can be submitted for a change in indication. Or D, in GDUFA III, the review of certain suitability petitions will be prioritized. The correct answer is C. A suitability petition cannot be submitted for a change in indication. Here we have provided you with a number of resources regarding suitability petitions. These are really great references, so I encourage you to read them if you have an interest in submitting a suitability petition or an ANDA referencing an approved suitability petition. In closing, the main takeaways that I would like you to remember are that suitability petitions are a request to submit an ANDA that is different from the reference listed drug. Please be aware of limitations and potential obstacles to using suitability petitions. And finally, remember that changes to the suitability petition process are coming as part of the GDUFA III commitment letter. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions later during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Roseanne Pagaduan, and I am a supervisory pharmacist in the Division of Filing Review within the Office of Regulatory Operations in OGD. And during this session, I'll be presenting best practices for submitting a suitability petition. The learning objectives I will cover are to provide a general background on suitability petitions, describe the proper format and content of a petition, review the requirements for submitting suitability petitions that trigger the Pediatric Research Equity Act, or PREA, list the reasons for denial of a suitability petition, and identify the best practices and tips for submitting a quality suitability petition. So let's jump into a little background on suitability petitions. Prospective applicants may submit a petition to the Food and Drug Administration under Section 505J2C of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and in accordance with 21 CFR 1020, 1030, and 314.93, requesting permission to submit an abbreviated new drug application for a generic drug product that differs from a reference listed drug in one or more of the following: route of administration, dosage form, strength, or a change in one active ingredient in a fixed combination drug product. In other words, a drug product with multiple active ingredients. Now I'll go over the format and content of suitability petitions. Suitability petitions are a type of citizen petition, and sponsors must follow the format as outlined in 21 CFR 1030. These petitions are submitted to Dockets Management Staff, or DMS, and the request and the FDA's response are publicly disclosed. There are 5 sections of a petition: the action requested, statement of grounds, environmental impact, economic impact, and certification. Now I'll dig a little deeper into each section of a suitability petition. In the action requested section, petitioners must identify the proposed generic product and provide a description of the permissible change or changes being requested. They must also identify the RLD, which is serving as the legal basis for their petition, and include its dosage form, strength, and active ingredient or ingredients. Section B is the Statement of Grounds section, which is where petitioners must provide a comprehensive justification for the proposed change from the RLD being requested. It is important to note that petitioners should only identify a single RLD as the basis for their proposed change. This applies to all suitability petitions regardless of the type of change proposed. Section C addresses the environmental impact. Petitioners may request a categorical exclusion under 21 CFR 2530 from the requirement to prepare an environmental assessment, or they may provide an environmental assessment under 21 CFR 2540. Section D addresses the economic impact. Petitioners must provide an economic impact statement if requested by the Commissioner following review of the petition. The petitioner must indicate that such an analysis will be provided upon request. And lastly, Section E, petitioners must provide a certification that the petition includes, to the best knowledge and belief of the petitioner, all information and views on which the petition relies, and that it includes representative data and information known to the petitioner which are unfavorable to the petition. Now I'll discuss additional content to include when submitting a suitability petition. In accordance with 21 CFR 314.93d, petitioners must provide a copy of the currently approved RLD labeling, as well as a copy of the proposed labeling for their drug product. The following is recommended supplemental information that may facilitate the review of a suitability petition. Petitioners can provide proposed labeling which is annotated, identifying all differences in prescribing information from the RLD. If there is a proposed change in strength, provide a description of the proposed product. For example, the tablet color, shape, size, or any identifying imprint codes. If available, provide carton labeling and container labels. Recommended supplemental information for petitions requesting a different active ingredient in a fixed combination drug product include the following. Provide a description of any differences in clinical safety or efficacy that may be seen with the newly proposed active ingredient compared to the active ingredient in the RLD. For example, if the new active ingredient has a narrow therapeutic index or may give rise to different adverse events. Verify whether dosing or presentation of strength of the overall product will change as a result of the substitution of one of the active ingredients. For petitions requesting a different route of administration or dosage form, verify whether dosing of the drug product will change. Submit information on whether a different route of administration or dosage form gives rise to a potentially different adverse event profile. For example, going from a tablet to an injection may lead to injection site reactions that do not otherwise exist for the tablet formulation. Include details of what the clinical outcome or impact is if a user were to administer the proposed product through the RLD's intended route of administration. Indicate any changes in administration technique or instructions for use. For example, changes in instructions from a tablet to an orally disintegrating tablet. Now discuss suitability petitions with regard to PRIA. ANDAs submitted under an approved suitability petition for changes in dosage form, route of administration, or new active ingredient in fixed combination products are subject to the pediatric assessment requirements that PRIA imposes. PRIA authorizes FDA to waive the requirement to submit a pediatric assessment based on established criteria for some or all pediatric age groups. Thus, for any suitability petition requesting a change in dosage form, route of administration, or new ingredient in a fixed combination product, an applicant must provide a request to waive the requirements triggered by PRIA. If clinical studies are required under PRIA for proposed products submitted under a suitability petition and a waiver is not granted, the suitability petition will be denied. What should be included in a PRIA waiver request as part of your suitability petition? State the reason or reasons for waiving pediatric assessment requirements with reference to applicable statutory authority. Those reasons are as follows. Necessary studies are impossible or highly impracticable because, for example, the number of pediatric patients is so small or geographically dispersed. The product would be ineffective or unsafe in one or more of the pediatric age groups for which a waiver is being requested. The product fails to represent a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing therapies for pediatric patients and is unlikely to be used in a substantial number of all pediatric age groups or the pediatric age group for which a waiver is being requested. Reasonable attempts to produce a pediatric formulation for one or more of the pediatric age group or groups for which the waiver is being requested have failed. Provide evidence that the statutory basis or bases for waiver of pediatric studies have been met. Lastly, provide a certification to the information provided in the PRIA waiver. Now discuss several reasons for denial of a suitability petition. FDA will approve a suitability petition unless, among other reasons, one of the following occurs. FDA determines that the safety and effectiveness of the proposed change from the RLD cannot be adequately evaluated without data from investigations that would be beyond the scope of what may be required for an ANDA. A drug product is approved in a new drug application or NDA for the change requested in the suitability petition. The suitability petition requests changes to a drug product that trigger the need for pediatric studies under PRIA to assess the safety and efficacy of the drug product in a relevant pediatric subpopulation that would not be waived by the FDA, which renders the proposed product ineligible for approval in an ANDA. And lastly, the suitability petition requests a type of change or changes to a drug product that is or are not permitted under 21 CFR 314.93b. Now I'll go over some best practices for submitting a suitability petition and an associated ANDA. Check for already approved drug products in the Orange Book. A suitability petition will be denied if the proposed drug product has already been approved. This includes drug products approved through the 505(b)(2) pathway. Check for approved suitability petitions or duplicate petitions on regulations.gov. Wait for approval of your suitability petition. FDA will refuse to receive an ANDA citing a pending suitability petition or a suitability petition that was denied, as that ANDA would lack a legal basis for submission. Now for a couple challenge questions. Question number 1. Which of the following is not a permissible type of change from an RLD to request in a suitability petition? A. Change in dosage form. B. Change in route of administration. C. Change in salt form of the active pharmaceutical ingredient or API. D. Change in strength. Take a few moments to consider which answer you think is correct. The correct answer here is C. A change in salt form of the active pharmaceutical ingredient is not a permissible type of change from an RLD to request in a suitability petition. All right, so let's jump into challenge question number 2. Which of the following is not a valid justification for requesting a waiver for pediatric studies for a suitability petition with a proposed change or changes that trigger PREA? A. The product would be ineffective or unsafe in one or more of the pediatric age group or groups for which a waiver is being requested. B. Necessary studies are impossible or highly impracticable because, for example, the number of pediatric patients is so small or geographically dispersed. C. The product fails to represent a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing therapies for pediatric patients and is unlikely to be used in a substantial number of all pediatric age groups or the pediatric age group for which a waiver is being requested. And D. The sponsor does not have the resources or funding to perform pediatric studies to assess the safety and efficacy of the drug product in a relevant pediatric subpopulation. Take another few moments to consider which answer you think is correct. The correct answer here is D. Not having the resources or funding to perform pediatric studies is not a valid justification for a waiver request in a suitability petition. This slide provides a list of several resources related to suitability petitions. In summary, follow the format and content outlined for petitions as set forth in 21 CFR 1030. Provide a waiver request for suitability petitions proposing a change to a drug product that triggers the need for clinical pediatric studies under PREA. Applicants are strongly encouraged to provide the recommended supplemental information outlined in this presentation. And remember the best practices for submitting a quality suitability petition. Submit your ANDA after the applicable suitability petition is approved. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation. I will be back in a few minutes to answer questions during the Q&A panel session.
Thank you for that kind introduction. This afternoon I will be speaking to you about bridging the difference, bioequivalence assessments for suitability petitions. More plainly put, how bioequivalence is assessed for drug products once an ANDA has been submitted with an approved suitability petition. Please keep in mind that this will be a two-part presentation providing case studies for different scenarios encountered by the agency. From this portion of the presentation, I will discuss the following. What changes for an abbreviated new drug application can be made under a suitability petition? And secondly, case studies for evaluation of bioequivalence of ANDAs with approved suitability petitions regarding the addition of strengths that were not part of the original reference listed drug. An ANDA must be the same as an RLD in active ingredient, dosage form, strength, route of administration, and conditions of use and labeling. However, prior to an ANDA submission, an applicant may submit a suitability petition under 505J2C of the FD&C Act to seek a drug product with differences to that of the RLD. Applicants can seek an ANDA with the following differences from the RLD with an approved suitability petition: different route of administration, different dosage form, different strength, or one active ingredient is substituted for another in a combination drug product. This presentation will focus on the drug product seeking the addition of different strengths. Let's discuss the first case. The first drug product has two approved strengths, 500 milligram and 750 milligram. The 750 milligram strength is the reference standard for this drug product. The drug product has a therapeutic code of AA, meaning there is no known or suspected BE problems for this drug product. Therefore, this is a DESI drug product. DESI drug products were approved between 1938 to 1962 for safety only, but were later evaluated for effectiveness after 1962. Waiver of in vivo BE testing can be granted to DESI drug products pursuant to 21 CFR 320.22c if there is comparable dissolution data to that of the reference product. For the current ANDA, the applicant has an approved suitability petition for the addition of a 1,000 milligram strength. The applicant requested a waiver of in vivo BE studies for the 1,000 milligram strength based on DESI designation of the 500 milligram and 750 milligram strengths, formulation proportionality, comparable dissolution data, and asserting the drug product is highly soluble and permeable. The proposed 1,000 milligram strength for this drug product is compositionally proportional to the 500 milligram and 750 milligram strengths. Further, the applicant was able to provide comparable dissolution data between the 1,000 milligram strength to that of the 500 milligram and 750 milligram strengths. However, in contrast to the applicant's assertions, the drug product was not shown to be highly soluble or permeable. In addition, dose proportionality studies were not performed by the innovator of this drug product. Based on our evaluation, a waiver for in vivo BE studies of the 1,000 milligram strength was not granted since DESI designation covers the original strengths of the RLDRS. Dose proportionality studies were not performed by the innovator for this drug product, and the drug product is not shown to be highly soluble or permeable. Instead, the applicant was recommended to conduct fasting and fed BE studies utilizing the proposed 1,000 milligram strength versus two 500 milligram strengths of the RS. Now let's discuss the second case. This particular drug product has two approved strengths, 50 milligram and 100 milligrams, of which the 100 milligram strength is the RS. This drug product has a therapeutic equivalence code of AB, drug products for which any potential BE problems have been resolved with adequate in vivo and/or in vitro evidence supporting BE. The ANDA applicant has an approved suitability petition and is seeking the addition of a 25 milligram strength. The applicant has requested a waiver of in vivo BE studies for the 25 milligram strength based on the 25 milligram strength being compositionally proportional to the 50 milligram and 100 milligram strengths, submitting comparable in vitro dissolution data between the proposed 25 milligram strength to that of the 50 milligram and 100 milligram strengths, and lastly, acceptable BE studies conducted on the highest 100 milligram strength. During the bioequivalence evaluation for this drug product, the formulation for the 25 milligram strength was deemed acceptable. Further, the 100 milligram strength underwent acceptable fasting and fed in vivo BE studies, and the in vitro dissolution data between the 25 milligram, 50 milligram, and 100 milligram strengths was deemed comparable. Finally, the innovator has performed dose proportionality studies between the 50 milligram and 100 milligram strengths for this drug product. Based on our evaluation, a waiver of BE in vivo studies for the 25 milligram strength was granted due to acceptable BE studies conducted on the 100 milligram strength, comparable dissolution data, and a compositionally proportional formulation between the proposed 25 milligram strength to that of the original 50 milligram and 100 milligram strengths. In summary, suitability petitions submitted for different strengths entail the addition of strengths that are not included within the RLD. These strengths may be lower, within, or higher than the original strengths of the RLD. If an applicant seeks a waiver of in vivo BE study requirements for the addition of a non-RLD strength, it would rely on strong BE evidence, such as dose proportionality studies performed by the innovator, comparable dissolution data, and a compositionally proportional formulation. Here is the first challenge question for this section. Suitability petitions allow for the following except A, different dosage form, B, different strength, C, different indication, or D, different route of administration. The answer is C, different indication. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the following people for their assistance in this presentation within the Office of Generic Drugs: Dr. Partha Roy, Dr. April Brady, Dr. Ki Rin, Dr. Wendy Kai, Dr. Bing Lee, and Dr. Heather Boyce. Thank you for your attention. At the end of the session, I will be available for any questions you may have. And with that, I will pass the remainder of this session to Dr. Heather Boyce from the Office of Research and Standards.
Thank you, Dr. Pamela Dorsey, for initiating the discussion on establishing bioequivalence for drug products with an approved suitability petition. In the second half of this presentation, I will cover an additional example of a dosage form change. In addition, I'll also discuss how we incorporate our bioequivalence recommendations for suitability petition-based products into our product-specific guidance program. As required, here is the standard disclaimer. In this part of the presentation, you will learn what the benefits of a dosage form change are. You'll be able to describe a dosage form change approved via suitability petition. You will be able to consider important pharmaceutical equivalence criteria for evaluating a dosage form change. And you'll also be able to review the structure of a product-specific guidance for suitability petition-approved products. As already discussed in this session, there are 4 changes that can occur under suitability petition. Because Dr. Pamela Dorsey has already covered case studies on different strengths, I will be covering a case study on a different dosage form. Let's take a look at changing carbidopa-levodopa oral tablets to an orally disintegrating tablet. Okay, let's take a look at the reference listed drug product characteristics. Sinemet was approved in 1975 and contains carbidopa and levodopa in 3 different strengths as a tablet for oral administration. The tablet was approved for the treatment of Parkinson's disease, post-encephalitic Parkinsonism, and symptomatic Parkinsonism. Parkinson's disease patients may develop dysphagia as a result of their disease progression. And although dopaminergic medications may improve symptoms related to bradykinesia, they do not always guarantee improved swallowing function. Therefore, it's important to offer Parkinson's disease patients alternative dosage forms, such as orally disintegrating tablets, solutions, and suspensions. These type of dosage forms can reduce the risk of choking and improve patient compliance. As such, these 3 dosage form change requests were made for Sinemet via suitability petition. The petition for orally disintegrating tablets and the petition for tablets for oral suspension were both approved in 2002. Subsequently, a first ANDA was approved in 2004 and 2005 respectively. A third petition request was made for powder to be reconstituted to liquid. This petition was approved in 1996. However, from 1996 to 2003, there were no ANDAs filed, and underneath the Pediatric Research Equity Act of 2003, this petition was subsequently withdrawn in 2007. Okay, let's focus on how the orally disintegrating tablet was approved. On review of the initial petition for orally disintegrating tablets, FDA determined that the dosage form change does not pose questions of safety or efficacy. In addition, FDA also evaluated this change with respect to the Pediatric Research Equity Act. Therefore, FDA determined that there was no therapeutic benefit over existing therapies for pediatric patients, and the product is not likely to be used in a substantial number of pediatric patients. 4 ANDAs were approved based on the suitability petition. Parcopa was the first ANDA approved in 2004, and the submission was based on comparison to Sinemet tablet. The subsequent 3 ANDAs approved after Parcopa were based on comparison to Parcopa. Currently, Parcopa is discontinued, and another ANDA is listed as the RS. Okay, let's talk about how Parcopa was approved. Because ODTs can reside in the mouth for up to 2 minutes, disintegration and taste masking become important attributes of the ODT dosage form. In addition, because of their delicate nature, tablet friability and packaging should also be considered. In addition, because ODTs are intended to be administered without water, administration of with or without water in a bioequivalence study should be considered. Applicants should consider the instructions on the RLD labeling with respect to whether the ODT should be administered with water only or without water only. If the labeling indicates the ODT product may be administered with or without water, applicants should test the product without water, as this represents the worst case scenario condition and also represents the intended use of the ODT dosage form. The carbidopa-levodopa ODT formulation contains RapidCab technology, which allows the ODT to dissolve rapidly in less than 30 seconds on the tongue with saliva and without chewing. Water is not necessary to disintegrate the tablet, and release of carbidopa and levodopa is targeted to occur in 30 minutes. The ODT is also flavored as a mint-flavored tablet, and it's packaged in bottles. The basis of approval for the carbidopa and levodopa ODT was based on the suitability petition discussed earlier, which approved the change from tablet to ODT. In addition, a fasting bioequivalence study was conducted comparing the ODT against the carbidopa and levodopa tablet of the highest strength. Of note, the ODT was administered without any additional water. Biowaivers for the lower strength of the products were based on acceptable bioequivalence study results, in vitro dissolution testing, and compositional proportionality of the ODT tablet across strength. Of note, at the time, a fed bioequivalence study was not recommended for this product. Okay, let's talk about product-specific guidance. Let's talk about Sufixime oral suspension. The suspension was initially approved in 1989 under a new drug application for the strength of 100 milligram per 5 milliliter. In 2004, an abbreviated new drug application for that strength was approved. Subsequently, a suitability petition was submitted requesting a change in strength from 100 milligram per 5 milliliter to 200 milligram per 5 milliliter. That petition was approved in 2005, and the ANDA for that concentrated strength was approved in 2007. In 2013, a new drug application was submitted for a strength of 500 milligram per 5 milliliter. The basis of submission for that new drug application was actually based on the ANDA for the 200 milligram per 5 milliliter product. The product-specific guidance of Cefexime oral suspension is interesting because the 3 strengths of Cefexime oral suspension were approved based on 3 different types of applications: a 505(b)(2) new drug application, an ANDA, and a suitability petition ANDA. The 500 milligram per 5 milliliter strength is assigned as the RLD and RS as the highest marketed strength for this product line. A waiver of in vivo testing for the lower strengths is based on the fact that OGD considers these 3 strengths as part of the same product line because each concentrated strength was approved based on the prior approved lower strength. However, a separate ANDA is still required for each strength because of the unique approval pathway. In summary, dosage form changes may offer improved patient compliance. Today, I shared with you an example of a successful suitability petition that resulted in several approved ANDAs for a dosage form change. Additionally, dosage form changes may have unique product characteristics that should be considered as part of development. Finally, OGD implements guidances for products approved via suitability petition into their PSG recommendations. And now for the second challenge question of the session. When an ODT label recommends for products to be administered with or without water, the applicant should demonstrate bioequivalence by administering the test and reference product A, with water, B, without water, C, the applicant can choose to conduct the BE study with or without water, D, the applicant should conduct 2 studies, one with water and another study without water. And the answer is without water. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the team that made this presentation possible: Dr. Robert Leinberger, Dr. Lei Zhang, Dr. Myungjin Kim, Dr. Xinwan Shi, and Dr. Pamela Dorsey. And thank you for your attention. I look forward to more discussion during the panel session.
Thanks for the great presentations. This is our last Q&A panel for the workshop. If you haven't had a chance to submit your question into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Please join me in welcoming to our Q&A panel from day one, Commander Andrew Fine, and also joining us on the panel, we welcome Ms. Arlene Figueroa, who joined FDA in 2020 and serves as a regulatory counsel in the OGD Office of Generic Drug Policy. Arlene provides policy consultation on the generic drug regulatory review process within FDA, such as the implementation of the Hatch-Waxman amendments to the FD&C Act, pertinent regulations, and guidance documents. Looks like we have a few questions coming in right now, and the first group of questions are directed to Dr. Robert Leinberger. First question for Dr. Leinberger is the following. Is the new strength with better viability compared to the RLD-RS under the scope of 505J or 505B2 with the same dosage form? And what will be the scope of the same scenario with different dosage forms with different strengths?
Thanks, Ray, for that question. So I think this is an awesome question. I think it's very sort of subtle and devious and very hard to answer. So I'm not sure if I'm really going to give you an answer to it, but I do want to, talk about it a little bit because it raises some of the ideas that I talked about in my talk about once you actually begin to have a suitability process that works better, you expose a lot of things that may have not come up. So the first part of the question, right, what if I have a product that has better bioavailability than the RLD? Right? Again, the basis of the generic drug program is sameness and equivalence. So you're really not in the scope there. That's a product that if you really have a clinical case for why a better bioavailability product meets some need, right, you have to make that argument through probably through a B2 application process with the appropriate clinical explanation of why it's better, right? There's not a pathway for a better bioavailability product in the ANDA in the ANDA pathway, if you know what to do, because the goal is sameness as a reference product. But I think the second part of the question gets to the sort of subtlety, and I want to sort of point out why this is sort of a tricky question, right? Because it says, well, what if I tried to do the same thing and I asked for a suitability petition for a tablet and a capsule with a different strength, right? Or deliberately saying that I'm a different strength. And that raises, I think, the question, and you saw a little bit of this in the talks by Pamela and Heather, right? That once you get to the point of a suitability petition, then there's a question of what's the appropriate bioavailability standard to approve the product. Once the petition is approved, right, what's the appropriate standard for approving the product, right? And if you said, in that case, I submitted a product that had a different bioavailability than my RLD, and what study would I do to detect that, right? And I think the idea is that, and I think we, again, because we haven't used that many suitability petitions, I don't know that there's a huge amount of examples as to exactly what the standard would be for the approvability of the product once the suitability petition is involved. But I think we'd have, I think from a review perspective, a concern with a product that was using that sort of loophole to say, well, look, I'm trying to introduce through my petition strength a product that's more bioavailable than the reference product. But the advice I would have that if you are in this situation is that, as we begin to see more use of the suitability petition process, right, then you also have to have more use of the pre-ANDA processes that we have available to get advice on the studies that you would do to support a product with that suitability petition. And the examples of places you might ask this question, right, are through the control correspondence process, or in more complicated cases through a pre-ANDA meeting process to talk about what the appropriate bridging would be for that. But again, the talks by Pamela and Heather gave some idea of like, look, what we try to do for the bioavailability standard for the solid oral dosage forms is find the idea that's consistent with the principle of equivalence. But that's not the exact standard for the suitability petition, right? If the strengths are offset, you're never going to have exact bioequivalence, right? You have to have an appropriate relative bioavailability. And that standard is, as we often say, a review issue for the product. But again, that's something that you might ask questions about during the development of the suitability petition or before you file an application pursuant to an approved suitability petition. So I think that's a very, very interesting and thoughtful question. Again, if suitability petitions come more prominent, I think you could expect in the future FDA to give more advice around the appropriate bioequivalence standards for the products.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Dr. Lionberger, and here is the question. Is a suitability petition applicable for injectable solution suspensions with different excipients compared to the NDA reference listed drug, which is discontinued and withdrawn, not for safety and efficacy?
Again, I think this is another question that sort of, points to some of the, future challenges with implementing the suitability petition process. So clearly, if you just want to have a change in excipients, that's not a petitionable change. You heard many of our staff members talk about what the petitionable changes are, and a difference in excipients is not one of them. So it really is not the suitability petition process, pathway for the subject of this question. You'd have to, if you wanted to pursue this as an ANDA, you'd have to look at our regulations on the Q1, Q2 regulations and what the process for requesting a waiver of those regulations is. So that would be the direction. It's not a suitability petitionable change. But I think like the previous question, it does touch on what should the standards be for suitability petitions? If I do get a suitability petition approved for a different dosage form, that dosage form, right, it's a different dosage form. It can't really be Q1, Q2 the same as the reference product. And so what's the appropriate scientific bridging for the, or even in the case of a different presentation of injectables, generally if the concentrations are the same, it's very straightforward to say the goal for the review, the standard for the review ought to be the same as the concentration. But I think there are edge cases here which will be, I think, interesting to resolve as well. So again, I think that was really the theme of my talk at the beginning, is as suitability petitions become more widely used, then we'll have to work through all of the different, what are the standards for approval of the product that's submitted? What's the right way to bridge when you have things like for solutions and waivers and Q1, Q2 waivers, but products can't be exactly Q1, Q2 because there might be a petition difference. How are those handled? What are the appropriate standards in those cases? Or what's the appropriate bioavailability standard? And I think you may see in the future, if there are approved suitability petitions and we want to encourage applications, we may consider writing product-specific guidances that cover the approved suitability petition. So after a suitability petition is approved, we could add that to a product-specific guidance to give guidance on how to incorporate that into our existing systems. That's one possibility you might see. But before that happens, the venues that you have to answer these questions, depending on whether it's a complex product or not, would be the control correspondence pathway or the pre-ANDA meeting pathways.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist. We got a couple questions in for Susan Levine, and here is the first question. If a suitability petition has been submitted by another applicant and approved, do I need to submit my own suitability petition for the same change?
Thanks for the question. No, once a suitability petition has been approved by FDA for a particular change, any applicant can rely on the approved petition for that change, not just the applicant who submitted the petition. So there's no need to submit another suitability petition in this particular circumstance.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Susan Levine, and here is the question. If I've previously submitted a suitability petition and have not received a response, what is going to happen to my suitability petition in GDUFA III?
In the GDUFA III commitment letter, FDA agreed that prior to fiscal year 2024 to take appropriate action to determine if petitioners who submitted suitability petitions prior to fiscal year 2023 remain interested in a response. FDA also agreed to work diligently to review and respond to our pending suitability petitions.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we did get a couple of questions in for Dr. Roseanne Pagaduan, and here is the first question for Dr. Pagaduan. Can you give me an example of an environmental impact and even economic impact for a suitability petition?
Sure, thank you for that question. So the requirements for the environmental and economic impact sections of a suitability petition are outlined in 21 CFR 1030. For the environmental impact, similar to when submitting an ANDA, a claim for categorical exclusion or an environmental assessment may be provided. For the economic impact, information is only required to be submitted when requested by the commissioner following review of the petition. So petitioners should provide a statement that they will meet this requirement upon request. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Dr. Pagaduan, and here is the question. Can a suitability petition be filed for both change in strength and dosage?
Great question. Yes, multiple changes may be submitted in a single suitability petition as long as the proposed changes are permissible changes as outlined in 21 CFR 314.93. I would note that if any of the proposed changes trigger PREA, then a PREA waiver request must be submitted with the petition.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we did get a question in for Dr. Pamela Dorsey, and here is the question for Dr. Dorsey. How can the addition of a new strength for a drug product with an approved suitability petition be beneficial?
That's a great question. The addition of a new strength can actually improve patient compliance. Say a dosage for a particular drug product can be given up to 150 milligrams per day, but it is only available in the 25 milligram and 50 milligram strengths. The creation of a 100 milligram or 150 milligram strength per se can decrease the number of dosage units the patient would need to take in order to yield that 150 milligram dosage. So it can actually help with patient compliance. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to the next panelist, we have a question in for Heather Boyce. And here is the question. Can a biowaiver be attained for a change in dosage form of an IR drug product where the original dosage form is classified as a BCS 1 or 3 drug?
Thank you for that question. It's actually a very interesting question. I think the response here is mostly for how we practice the BCS biowaivers is we typically look at the dosage form itself. So if the original dosage form might have a BCS1 or BCS3 biowaiver on, the PSG, you're still going to have to evaluate the BCS classification for the new dosage form. So if an applicant is intending to submit their application with the BCS1 or BCS3 for that new dosage form, you're going to want to go in and follow the M9 biopharmaceutics classification system for that requested dosage form change and submit the appropriate solubility and permeability data for that specific dosage form.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a couple questions that came in for Arlene Figueroa, and here is the first question. What if my suitability petition is missing required data, such as labeling of the proposed product? Will my petition be automatically denied, or does FDA reach out for the missing information?
Thank you so much for that great question. So we do encourage petitioners to submit a complete petition so that you can avoid delays in processing your petition. However, if you inadvertently did not include required data in your submission, our process is to issue an information request for the missing information.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Arlene Figueroa, and here is the question. What are examples of significant labeling changes caused by the proposed change that would result in the SP being denied?
Thank you again for asking that question. So significant labeling changes that may result in the suitability petition being denied are changes that raise questions of safety and effectiveness. For example, significant labeling changes would be when a proposed new strength introduces confusion for prescribers on how to appropriately titrate the dose in patients and would thus lead to dosing errors. So if the proposed change is not consistent with dosing recommendations in labeling of the listed drug, the petition may be denied. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have a few questions coming in for Susan Levine, and here is the first question. How can I get a goal date for my pending suitability petition?
Thanks for the question. According to the GDUFA III commitment letter, goal dates for suitability petitions do not begin until fiscal year 2024. So if a petitioner wants to receive a goal date on a suitability petition that was submitted prior to fiscal year 2024, they may withdraw and resubmit a new suitability petition during fiscal years 2024 through 2027.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have another question for Susan Levine, and here is the question. What will happen to my approved suitability petition if a new drug is approved with the same change later?
That's another great question. So if a new drug is approved for the same change, then an applicant can no longer rely on that approved suitability petition for the same change. So the applicant must reference the new drug application that's been approved for the same change. If an ANDA was already approved for that change that's in the suitability petition, then that ANDA is not impacted by the subsequent new drug approval. As for the suitability petition itself, FDA may withdraw approval of the suitability petition. However, the suitability petition may no longer be referenced, even if the docket still contains the approved suitability petition.
Thank you for responding to that question. Moving on to our next panelist, we had a few questions come in for Roseanne Pagadawan, and here's the first question for Dr. Pagadawan. What should I do if the point of contact for my suitability petition changes?
Thank you for that question. So any changes or updates to your petition should be submitted to dockets management staff the same way that you submitted your petition. Just be sure to reference the docket number that was assigned to your suitability petition. And always note that it is important to ensure the point of contact for your petition is always up to date.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Dr. Pagadawan, and here is the question. My suitability petition has been approved. What do I need to include when I submit my NDA, and what should be listed as the basis of the submission?
Great question. I don't think this was covered in our presentation actually. But when an applicant submits a petitioned ANDA, the basis of submission is the RLD and the approved suitability petition together. The ANDA must contain 1, the name of the RLD, which must be the same as the listed drug identified in the approved suitability petition. 2, a reference to the suitability petition's FDA-assigned docket number. And 3, a copy of FDA's correspondence approving the suitability petition. Also, if you wanted to reference a suitability petition that was not submitted by you, all petitions are publicly available on regulations.gov and are petitionable, or it may be used to submit your ANDA. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank all of our presenters and our panelists for the great presentations and answering numerous questions over the last 2 days. It's our pleasure to turn back over to Dr. Robert Leinberger to provide some closing remarks. Welcome back, Dr. Leinberger.
Thanks, Ray. So this is a great session on suitability petitions, a lot of interesting questions. and I look forward to what the future holds with the use of the suitability petitions. But it's my great pleasure to close out this event. It's been a fantastic 2 days. I hope that all of you attendees have learned something you will take back to your organization, and that this will help you develop safe and effective generic products, prepare applications to submit to FDA, and also understand and respond to any questions you receive from the FDA assessment process. And hopefully this event has been very helpful in that. Complex generics are great importance to both you and the generic industry for the important role that they play in your product portfolio, but also to the patients that depend on generic competition to provide reliable, robust, and affordable access to the medications that they need. And hopefully this event has helped increase the possibility that there'll be more complex generics in the future, that when you submit your applications, they'll be on the faster path to an approval. And if you do get deficiencies or questions during the assessment process, you'll have a better understanding of what FDA is looking for in your response to those questions. And because of this value in the generic drugs create, we want to maximize the use of the generic drug pathway. And this is especially important for the complex generics, where they're important to the viability of the industry as well as to the patient access on this. And I want to talk a little bit about the historical context of complex generics. In GDUFA I, FDA committed to a research program that included complex generics, and this surged the development of product-specific guidances for complex products. In GDUFA II, FDA added pre-ANDA meetings for complex products. This has been a very successful part of the program. We've received probably around 500 meeting requests over the course of GDUFA II. But as we move forward and continue these extremely successful parts of our program, a new focus becomes clear, and you can see it in the title of this workshop: Advancing Generic Drug Development, Translating Science to Approval. And that's what we try to really bring out in this program, that as we focus on complex generics, we employ novel scientific and modeling methods to support generic drug applications. We want to be able to show the impact of those by moving products through the system and making them available to the American public. And as I look forward to the future, really we're looking forward to modernizing our generic drug program to do this more effectively. And I think this workshop is a big part of that and illustrates lots of themes that we hope you'll see in the future. First step for our future generic drug program is our scientific foundations for equivalence must be sound. The equivalent science, innovative science is critical for complex generics. You see a lot of the places where those new approaches are relevant in this workshop. But I also want to remind you that our scientific foundations are really important for non-complex products. They help ensure efficient and optimal equivalence standards. You heard mentions of, well, what's the are biowaivers? Can biowaivers be used for petitioned ANDAs? All of these things come from our scientific foundation. And we look forward to harmonization through the M13 process around some of the non-complex products that builds on that scientific foundation. So across the whole program, both for complex generics and the non-complex products, the importance of the scientific foundations are there. As we advance the science, we have better understanding of product properties, we can develop more efficient regulatory pathways to implement that. Second aspect that I think you'll see in the future is a shift toward more pre-ANDA interactions. Our product-specific guidances, the answers to control correspondences, and the pre-ANDA meetings all set the foundation for efficient ANDA reviews and provide product developers the clarity they need to make investments in developing generic products. And this is a change. In the past, when I joined FDA, the generic program was very much ANDA review focused. Almost the vast majority of the work was done on the application review. But in the future, you see through all of these different aspects of our program, PSGs, control correspondence, pre-ANDA meetings, a more balanced program emerging that may look a little bit more like the new drug process, where there's more of the effort placed on the advice before the submission comes in. And hopefully this makes the application review faster and more efficient. That's what we aspire to do for the generic program as it grows over time. third aspect of our modernized program, and you heard a little bit of it in this program today, is the importance of the new approaches to data science, machine learning, and IT advances to develop more effective ways to really efficiently review application submissions and analyze the data that's incorporated in them. I think this is a big theme that you'll see as we develop our internal processes, but also use these new approaches to make our review processes more efficient internally. And finally, as a part of the modernized generic drug process, moving these fantastic scientific advances toward approval. And that's, I think, what you'll see in the future is more transparency and interactions after submission. You'll have the opportunities to have the same type of science-driven interactions you have in the pre-ANDA program when a challenging issue arises during the ANDA assessment process. So if you look at the speakers for this event, many of our ANDA drug product assessors from both the Office of Generic Drugs and the Office of Product Quality were speakers in this meeting. And they'll be the parts of the groups that you'll interact with in future post-submission meetings as you use new processes to interact and figure out what those challenges are and resolve them through the application process. And that's a really big goal we had for this workshop here, again, through the title, Translating Science to Approval. And hopefully you begin to see what the future looks like when you see those types of interactions and moving forward. So I hope that you all will join us on this journey to a more effective generic program as we move forward. I want to thank our commissioner, Dr. Kayla, for his opening remarks and his support for modernizing the generic drug program in all of these different ways. I want to thank the organizing committee from OGD and OPQ, including Lei Zhang, Lucy Fang, Darby Kozak, Bing Li, Bing Kai, Wei Jie Sun, Nilofer Tampal, Channing Guo, Fallon Small, Susan Levine, Stephanie Sukup, Karen Bankston, and Maria Monroy Osario, all of which worked diligently on developing the program, chasing down the speakers, to get all of our slides ready on time, all of the work that went into making this a fantastic program. I want to recognize all of the session chairs who helped put together the content and the panels. They were the people driving the scientific discussion. I want to shout out to all of the speakers who took time away from all of the other FDA work that they have to develop these presentations, work with their leadership to get them cleared, worked with the other speakers in their panel to bring together a coherent message. There's a lot of work from the speakers that goes on behind the scenes, and so I want to recognize them for all of their contributions to this event. And finally, I want to appreciate the FDA staff, the SBIA staff and contractors that make these events seamless in their execution. They do, we've done so many of these and they do them so well. It's fantastic to work for them. Both the people that you see, like Ray Ford in front of the scenes and Brenda, as well as the staff behind the scenes that help prepare everything and work on logistics and get everything working right. They do a fantastic job. We love working with them. And they really bring a key and important message to the generic industry. And hopefully they help you develop products and bring those products into FDA and give you the keys to success for a successful ANDA submission and eventually product launch. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending and listening. We welcome your feedback through the SBIA process, and don't forget to get your certificate, fill out the surveys. These help us improve this event. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you for everyone who worked on this wonderful event.
Thank you, Dr. Leinberger, for those wonderful remarks. And just remember that recordings will be posted within 7 business days. So please look for those at fda.gov /SBIA. And remember the certificate of attendance to support continuing education for SOCA RAPS, SQ, and ACRP will be available until October the 5th. This concludes our workshop on advancing generic drug development for 2022.